Welcome to another edition of Land of 10 Live. Sam Radin alongside Michigan running back Chris Howard, ready to break it down for this bowl season and beyond as we start talking Big Ten recruiting. How you doing, Chris Howard? Happy holidays to you.
I'm good, man. Happy holidays to you. How's everything going?
I'm doing great, and I hope our viewers are doing the same. We appreciate you guys being with us on our Land of 10 Live Facebook page. And remember that you can check us out throughout the course of the holiday season. Plenty more to come on this program, obviously, as we're just getting started previewing some of the Big Ten's bowl games. But we're going to have dedicated previews up for each of the Big Ten bowl games, so you'll want to be a part of that coming up during the course of the program. Chris, I want to ask you about your recruiting experience as we do talk some recruiting today. But as we get you set for what you'll expect to see over the course of the next 30 minutes, we'll spend some time today on Scott Frost, once again, being named the Coach of the Year and how that relates to Nebraska, the impact that that'll have on the Big Ten as he officially joins the fold coming in to the 2018 season. We will talk recruiting with our expert for recruiting here on Land of 10 Live, Tyler Donahue. He will break down some of the 5 biggest recruits that we might hear from on the early signing day period tomorrow, and then we will also spend some time getting bowled over, as I like to say, the biggest Big Ten bowl games and beyond. And as always, we've got our viewer interaction. If you guys want to join us on our Land of 10 Live Facebook page, you don't see it, but when I'm off camera, I'm going nuts on this computer trying to keep up with all your guys' comments. We'll get those aired for you throughout the course of the program. But we start off tonight with Scott Frost, officially named Coach of the Year in college football. You know where I think about this and what this means for Nebraska and the stepping stone it is for Central Florida. But I guess the point tonight is the impact that this hire is going to have on the Big Ten. Where does this rank in the past few years as far as an off-the-field headline for the Big Ten?
Well, you know, for the Big Ten, I think this is just as good of a hire, or if not even a more important hire than it was for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Scott Frost, again, a prodigal son coming home to his alma mater to hopefully turn that program around. And again, with him playing in this bowl game against Auburn, does nothing more than to heighten his profile, heighten the profile of Nebraska. And I think it'll do wonders for them going into the recruiting. You know, but it's going to take them some time. I mean, again, he still has to get there. He still has to win. He still has to develop a team into championship caliber athletes. So we'll see what happens, but this is absolutely a great hire for Nebraska and for the Big Ten.
Let me make sure I understand you correctly here. You're saying that the Scott Frost hire at Nebraska is bigger than Jim Harbaugh at Michigan?
I didn't say bigger. I said just as important.
Okay.
Come on now, Sam. Stick with me now.
Pay attention here. I know we got a lot of moving parts on the program, but I guess, you know, when you look at the impact that it has on Nebraska and how low that they had fallen, maybe that is a fair comparison. Not the big name to the same degree that Harbaugh was with the NFL pedigree and everything he does off the field, but as far as the impact that it could have on Nebraska, I see where you're coming from with that. We'll see how it plays out on the field. Speaking of how it plays out on the field, we're going to find out beginning tomorrow how the new signing period works in college football and how the Big Ten is going to be affected by this. What are you looking forward to in the early signing period now with the Big Ten? What are some of the things that are catching your eye?
Well, you know, I think it's really interesting with the early signing period because before, coaches had to wait for, you know, these big announcements, right? These kids doing these Walking Dead videos, these kids doing announcements, jumping out of airplanes and everything else, right? But so now coaches were kind of beholden to waiting for what these kids were going to announce. So now you can figure out, is this kid really committed to me? Is he not committed to me? Do I need to make a change or not? So now it's allowing these coaches to get a little bit ahead of the curve in the recruiting set.
Coming up in less than 5 minutes, Tyler Donahue, our Land of 10 Live recruiting expert, will be with us to talk about some of the biggest storylines for the Big Ten as we get set for the early signing day tomorrow. Do want to spend a couple minutes, though, on some off-the-field news as it pertains to Ohio State, and believe me, this has to do with recruiting, too. Larry Johnson Sr., the reports are not true. The reports primarily led by his own son's Twitter feed, saying that he was going to retire imminently from Ohio State. That's not the case. Larry Johnson Sr. stays on. Bigger development on the field with the way he's produced defensive line prospects for Ohio State, or off the field when it comes to the recruiting impact that has this year and then beyond?
Well, listen, I think a lot of people thought this was negative recruiting, but in actuality, it was actual. His son was the one who kind of put out the tweet, which got this whole firestorm going. But I think Larry Johnson, he loves where he is. I think he loves coaching. He loves working with young men. He put in Nick Bosa, who's now the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year. I mean, he's an outstanding coach. What he's done for Ohio State has just been amazing. The defenses that he run, he'll bring in 3 rush guys. He'll bring in guys to literally just stop the run or pass rush. And he's just done an amazing job for Ohio State. It would be a huge blow if they lost Larry Johnson.
Just to kind of put a bow on what you said, if I'm not mistaken, Ohio State under Larry Johnson Sr. has had the last 4 defensive linemen of the year for the Big Ten. Now, you got a couple Bosas in there, which I understand, but I mean, this guy on the field is delivering, and when we start talking with Tyler Donahue in a couple of seconds here, you'll see this year again, some of the biggest outside pass rushing prospects are considering Ohio State, and it's largely because of both the tutelage and the recruiting impact of Larry Johnson Sr. What do you say? Can you feel the air turning here for recruiting? Before we get there, one more thing to get to on our quick hitters, though. Michigan making a move this week as well, kind of an under-the-radar move. Kevin Tolbert, the longtime strength and conditioning coach with Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, Michigan's going to let him go. What does that mean for the program?
Well, I think if you go back and you look at what Jim Harbaugh said in his press conference, he said we need to get bigger, we need to get stronger. And I think that was really an indictment on where he felt his team was from a strength standpoint. So listen, Harbaugh wants to win. He wants to be competitive. And so in order for him to do that, he's got to make sure that his guys are able to compete from a strength level against the competition in the Big Ten. And so Harbaugh wasted no time. He fired the strength and conditioning coach, and so now he's on the market looking for a new guy. I can guarantee you he will bring in someone who is an NFL quality, NFL caliber, probably some guy who's bringing in some new program that no one's ever seen before.
Well, we'll see if the Big Ten takes advantage any longer of Michigan at the point of attack, pushing around the Wolverines at the line of scrimmage. You're watching the Land of 10 live right here on our Land of 10 Facebook page. For news, insight, and expert analysis about all things Big Ten, join us weekly, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. Without further ado, though, we want to delve into some of these recruiting topics. Let's bring in our man Tyler Donahue from Land of 10 Live. He'll run through some of the biggest storylines for us. Tyler, thanks a lot for the time. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, ready for a big few days ahead of us. I appreciate you having me on tonight.
Now, I watched some of this stuff on other news outlets. How many batteries do you have lined up for your handheld devices? I mean, are you ready to go 24 hours potentially without being able to charge your battery?
Ooh, I think I've got maybe 2 or 3 backups, but I might need to make a quick run out to the store considering what tomorrow is shaping up to be.
Well, speaking of, talk about the impact a little bit about this new signing period. How's the Big Ten responded to this? What kind of statement do you think that the Big Ten's going to be able to make during this first early signing period?
Well, it sure does feel like the Big Ten is in a really excellent position, top to bottom, to bring in a lot of depth and a lot of talent. I mean, look at a team like Rutgers now in the top 40. Nebraska, they're starting to get the ball rolling for themselves a little bit. I believe there are now 12 teams in the top 45 for composite rankings among classes. Penn State, Ohio State, they've been in the top 5 for the whole duration of this recruiting cycle. And then you look at Michigan, you know they're going to get their players. Michigan State, after a nice bounce-back season, doing the same thing. Ultimately, I think the early signing period impact, I think I've seen it reverberate a little bit in how teams are handling their coaching, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire kind of stuff with the coaching carousel. We saw Penn State be very proactive in replacing Joe Moorhead. They did that from within at offensive coordinator, promoting Ricky Ronnie. They went out and they brought in Tyler Bowen from the Maryland coaching staff to shore things up after that. You saw Larry Johnson be proactive about, you know, some rumors or some false information being spread and saying that he is going to be at Ohio State, you know, for not just the rest of this year, but moving ahead, and that's big to reassure recruits. And I think we're seeing that across the board. I mean, Rutgers offensive line coach or offensive coordinator Jerry Kill hasn't really been with the program the last few weeks, from what I understand. And they put out a statement today saying that he is no longer with the program. I think that's the right thing to do. I think transparency is good. Teams know that they can't, you know, go into Christmas with concerns in the coaching staff because players don't want to go where there's unsteadiness, and I think that's been something I've noticed. But ultimately, really impressed by how well these teams have done and lining up the players to sign early. I was really kind of on the fence at how many players would jump all in, and we're seeing an extremely vast majority of committed recruits going to be signing on Wednesday. It's to the point right now where it really does feel like that first Wednesday in February. Even though we got Christmas around the corner and all these big bowl games coming up, it feels like, you know, the script is flipped, and now we're in that, you know, that February stretch run that we've become so accustomed to. And when the dust settles on Friday and into after Christmas, it's really just going to be, you know, who are these key few pieces that can really make or break at different recruiting classes, because a lot of these programs, especially in the Big Ten, are going to know exactly who's in their class really after Wednesday.
Yeah, Tyler, I want to talk, and that reminds me, I want to talk about this kid, Micah Parsons, one-time Penn State commit, 6'3", 235. I watched some of his film. I mean, the kid was playing tailback. I saw him return kicks for a touchdown. Super athletic kid. Was, again, once a Penn State commit. Seemed like he was starting to lean to Ohio State for a while, and then something happened with game day. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, this has been a bit of a roller coaster ride with Micah Parsons. Now, he got his first scholarship offers as a freshman, so this is a long time coming, his signature tomorrow. But yeah, the Ohio State drama was, you know, obviously front and center back in September, you know, during that game in which Ohio State got lumped up pretty good at home against Oklahoma. He put out a tweet suggesting that maybe Dwayne Haskins would be an appropriate choice for, you know, Urban Meyer to get his offense going. Dwayne Haskins, of course, one of the talented backups. We saw him play in the Michigan game. But, you know, Dwayne, when we look at the starting quarterback there, JT Barrett, I mean, no one is more highly respected in that locker room among coaches, among players. And that was kind of thought to be a reason for the perceived fallout between Parsons and Ohio State. Now today, a report from the Lantern, and kudos to them for this, they're saying that Ohio State basically self-imposed a restriction on themselves and cut off communication with Micah Parsons because of what happened when he was on campus. He got a chance to go up to the College Game Day site, sat with Eddie George, Kirk Herbstreit, and along the way, apparently some red tape was crossed, and they abruptly cut ties following his return to Harrisburg. Now, I actually met up with Micah Parsons and his father less than 2 weeks after that visit, and his father had told me communications weren't going on with Ohio State. They'd been cut off. He was under the impression that was because of how things shook out with the social media situation. He actually doubled down on that today. I saw he responded to the article. He's saying that the communication issue was because of Micah's tweets. But meanwhile, Micah Parsons on that trip, he told me that Urban Meyer had at least been some communication, but we're hearing that wasn't the case. There is a lot of, murky gray area in this situation, unfortunately. And, you just hope for Micah Parsons' sake, because of the timing of this, it doesn't mar what is supposed to be a really special day for him tomorrow. Ohio State's been on the sideline here for, really 3 months when they were originally seemed like the perceived leader after his decommitment from Penn State in April. And now I would say Penn State is the team, maybe a full circle recommitment. I think that's where things are leaning, but I'm told Georgia really made a strong impression on him during his final official visit. Things are going very well for the SEC champions right now. They had Justin Fields down there. Those two know each other from being in the Penn State class together. And on top of that, he was hosted by a couple Pennsylvania guys, Mark Webb, DeAndre Swift. I think the vibes were good. If there's one team that could blow this thing up for the Nittany Lions, it might just be the Georgia Bulldogs.
Well, if there's one team that might be competing with Ohio State nationally for the best recruiting class, it might be the Georgia Bulldogs. But although Micah Parsons, a guy in a lot of people's top 5 lists nationwide as far as recruits go, might have been between Ohio State and Penn State at some times. A lot of the guys we're going to talk about today, Tyler, are that way between Ohio State and Penn State, and one of those is Jayson Oweh, a guy who didn't really start playing football until a couple of years ago, primarily a basketball player. But is this one going to come down to Ohio State versus Penn State?
Sure seems like it. Oweh for quite a while now, going back in, I want to say July, June. Those are the first 2 teams he'll talk to you about when he mentions his favorites, and then he said they're his co-leaders. There was one point in the summer, I think Ohio State, following their Friday Night Lights event, very close to sealing the deal, but Oweh took a step back, reassessed, and decided he wanted to take some official visits. And that makes sense because, as you mentioned, he didn't start playing football until his junior year. He didn't receive his first offer until this past winter, and all of a sudden things blew up for this young man. Now, Notre Dame was kind of right there as a fringe number 3 with Ohio State and Penn State leading. He recently canceled an official visit there. He's not going to end up in South Bend. Alabama put a late offer on the table. Michigan recently hosted him for an official visit. But all signs point toward Ohio State versus Penn State. Very good rapport with both of those coaching staffs. He's been to Penn State 5 times. That's more than any other program in the country. He's been to Ohio State several times as well, including an official visit back in September. Larry Johnson, a major X factor here. We talked. I heard you talking about him before we came on. He's a guy that is an ace recruiter. He's someone that Ohio State leans on to close the deal with Urban Meyer. And if there's anyone who's going to do it in this recruitment, it might be him with Jason Oweh. However, I do get the sense right now Penn State may be just a stride ahead. There's still a bit until we find out where he's going publicly. He's going to announce January 4th at the Under Armour All-America game down in Orlando. But based on what I'm hearing and based on past conversations with Oweh, it's definitely going to be Ohio State or Penn State. Ultimately, I think he ends up playing in Happy Valley, and what a tandem, what a duo that could potentially be to bring into the roster for Sean Spencer, the defensive line coach for the Nittany Lions, bringing in Oweh and Parsons in this class. That would be a major victory for the Penn State program. But I would not count out Larry Johnson. I would not count out Ohio State just yet. And Greg Schiano, Urban Meyer were both at one of his basketball games recently, and so is the Penn State staff, and so is the Michigan staff. So he is feeling the love for a guy who really had to play catch-up with his recruitment because of the late start.
Tyler, talking about ill-advised tweets, our next guy, Jackson Carman, he had some personnel advice for Urban Meyer. How has that not affected his recruiting stance with Ohio State and his relationship with Urban Meyer? He still seems like a guy that's kind of leaning towards Ohio State. It hasn't affected his recruitment much like it did Micah Parsons.
I think the simplest answer here is a lot of people think he might be the best offensive lineman to come out of Ohio since Orlando Pace. So that'll buy you a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, you look past a lot of stuff there, right?
But it was interesting. I mean, we saw a bit of a barrage. It was almost like these recruits kind of spitballed off what Micah Parsons did. Jackson Carman was one of them. He wasn't the only one. But yeah, and then he got in a little bit of back and forth on Twitter with Kirk Herbstreit, who is willing to go toe-to-toe with just about anybody on Twitter. I think ultimately for Carman, there's just such a history between him and that program. They've known about Jackson Carman for several years now. He has been at the top of their in-state target board for a very long time. You can almost equate it to what Micah Parsons has gone through with Penn State. He was committed there for 14 months. They've had some rocky, turbulent times between those two parties, but they may get back together here tomorrow. I think Jackson Carman, he has that history. There's been ups, there's been downs, but Ohio State has been steadfast in trying to bring him to campus. They made their final pitch, went down to Fairfield, to his high school last week. Urban Meyer led that brigade, and we know he's one of the great closers in college football recruiting of this century. You put him right there with Nick Saban. He just seems to get the job done every year during this final run with his top guys. And, Jackson Carman, it would be a major, major blow to the Buckeyes. They don't have many sob stories on the recruiting trail since Urban Meyer got to town, but if they see Jackson Carman head out of town and end up with either the Clemson Tigers or the USC Trojans, and he was just out of USC this last weekend, that would be a tough pill to swallow for Ohio State. But I do think when he makes that decision tomorrow, it's going to be another big victory. And as I said, expectations are going to be sky high anytime you're mentioned in the same breath as an NFL Hall of Famer, former #1 overall draft pick like Orlando Pace.
All right, a couple quick hitters for you here, Tyler. Let's spend a little bit more time on Ohio State maybe and talk about Emory Jones. This is a case maybe where Ohio State is competing for the entire Big Ten against the likes of the SEC and even the ACC in terms of Florida State. What's the likelihood this guy stays in the Big Ten?
I don't see it happening. I think Emory Jones is going to end up down in Gainesville. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly here, I think him going down there pretty abruptly, getting down there and meeting up with the coach who first put an offer on the table for him in this entire recruiting process, That was Dan Mullen when he was with Mississippi State. I think, Florida State, both bring him into town. Florida clearly has a need at quarterback. It's been a glaring need for them for the past few years, probably longer than that. Ohio State has tremendous depth, at least in terms of talent. Tate Martell, Dwayne Haskins, two of the best to come out of the last couple of recruiting classes, along with Joe Burrow, a guy they like in that program. So Ohio State, I think, can recover from this. They brought in a second quarterback commit not too long ago, Matthew Baldwin from Lake Travis High School in Austin, Texas. He was committed to Colorado State. His name is not as flashy as Emory Jones, and Emory Jones has been the quarterback in that class since July 2016. But I do ultimately see him flipping to Florida and a big early win for Dan Mullen to get that done if it does indeed happen on Wednesday.
All right, right up against the wire here, Tyler. Tell us a little bit about Tyreek Smith and maybe use him as a prism. So we talked a lot about Ohio State and Penn State. Where does he fall into the equation, and which one of those two schools do you think has more at stake tomorrow? Can one of those schools separate itself to be head and shoulders above the others? Is it pretty clearly Ohio State, or with these kind of last-minute flips we talked about, is Penn State still in the running for the best class in the Big Ten?
Well, the trajectory of Oweh and the trajectory of Smith, a lot of parallels there, but they're crossing right now. I see Oweh now gravitating towards, and Smith gravitating towards Ohio State. From what I understand, the guys I heard that were on the official visit with him just 2 weeks ago in Happy Valley, it went well. They felt like he was going to be part of the family. Something has changed. He wants to. I just think he ends up at Ohio State despite really good relationships between his family and the Penn State coaching staff. So I see them splitting the difference here. I see Smith ending up at Ohio State, Oweh ending up at Penn State, and it's interesting because both these guys came into high school focused on basketball. Someone tapped them on the shoulder and said, hey, if you get on this football field, you might get some scholarship offers. They became two of the hottest recruits during the upperclassmen years, and here they are on the verge. And they're going to both be announcing on January 4th at the Under Armour All-America game. So don't expect a conclusion for Tyreek Smith just yet. But at this point, if Penn State especially is able to bag Parsons and Oweh, I think it's a done deal with Tyreek Smith going to Ohio State when he does announce on January 4th down in Orlando.
That's great stuff, Tyler. We look forward to reading you all week long on Atlanta 10 Live and the Facebook page. We know you got a busy week, so thanks a lot for spending some time with us today.
Hey, thank you. Enjoy the festivities.
We will. We'll do that. There's Tyler Donahue. He'll be with us on our Land of 10 Live Facebook page. And speaking of, that's where you can catch all of the action of Land of 10 Live right here on the Land of 10 Facebook page for news, insight, and expert analysis about all things Big Ten. Join us weekly at 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. Before we get into the bowls, squeeze in a couple seconds here to get familiar with Chris Howard, the 1997 national champion. Were there people doing shows about your recruitment in Louisiana and everything leading up to it, or was it a whole different process for you 20, 25 years ago?
Listen, it has completely changed. I think I had one reporter. We shot something in front of the Superdome. It was me and my parents, and I had on a Michigan hat, and that was it. That was my announcement. It has completely changed. Now kids are jumping out of planes. They're doing Walking Dead videos. I mean, it's become a complete production now, so it's definitely changed. But, the one thing I will say within recruitment, the more, spotlight that these kids have, especially with social media, you find situations like the Micah Parsons situation, like the Carmen situation, where kids sometimes shouldn't tweet things, right? They shouldn't say the things that they tweet. It's okay if you have an opinion, but it could cost you in the long run. And so you have to be careful. Thank God social media wasn't around when I played 10.
I was going to say, you think Lloyd Carr would have been appreciative if you did that old gag, maybe in front of the Superdome with 2 or 3 hats, maybe some other Big Ten schools, and you threw one behind you or into the Mississippi River or whatever it might have been?
I don't think Lloyd would have minded that, but I think, again, tradition with Michigan, me jumping out of an airplane might have been a little bit too much, or doing the Walking Dead video might have been a little too much. But again, it's a new day, it's a new era.
It is indeed a new day and a new era, especially when I tell you that it's the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic between Ohio State and USC as we start our look at some of the bowl games. Great matchup. You can't quibble with two of the most historic, tradition-laden programs over the last 50, if not 100 years in college football. But in the Cotton Bowl, I mean, something just doesn't seem right about this. And when you start to look at this matchup, as we were going through our show prep today, one of those numbers jumped out at the page off you as it came to USC in the statistical comparison.
I mean, it's amazing that a USC defense is giving up over 400 yards per game. I mean, and it's amazing that they've been this good giving up those kind of yards. But I tell you one thing, going up against Urban Meyer, who's won literally 72 of his 80 games since he's been at Ohio State, he knows how to win. And one thing that you know that Urban Meyer, they're going to do, they're going to take advantage of this USC defense that gives up a lot of yards per game. I think this game will come down to, though, the quarterback position. Which quarterback will make the least amount of mistakes? Sam Darnold had kind of a rocky start in the beginning of the season. J.T. Barrett, who was lights out for most of the season, all of a sudden had a huge letdown game against Iowa. But which quarterback can make the least amount of mistakes, I think, will win this game.
Remember, I'm watching for your comments on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. This might draw some of them. If, in fact, Sam Darnold winds up playing this game for USC, clearly he's positioning himself for the NFL draft, or at least we would so expect. I don't know what J.T. Barrett's NFL prospects are, but would Ohio State not be better served to give Dwayne Haskins more playing time at quarterback because he's what can lead the team next year? Is this not a game that you want to get him some snaps in?
No, absolutely not. I think J.T. Barrett, he deserves this win because, again, most of the postseason, J.T. Barrett has been injured. He's never played in some of these bowl games. So you owe it to J.T. Barrett for him to be the guy. He's the guy that got you here. You rode him here all the way to the Cotton Bowl. So that's your guy. I don't think it's necessary to get Dwayne Haskins some snaps unless it's a blowout. Now, you can get him some snaps if it's a blowout, but this is J.T. Barrett's last game, and you want him to go out like a champion.
I'll tell you what, we'll buck the trend here. You want to get our picks on these games, you got to check us out on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. We'll have separate previews for each of these bowl games. We're not putting them here in the regular content.
No, absolutely.
You got to go to the web. You got to get premium for our picks in these games. We will then shift focus to the Outback Bowl. We talk Ohio State, now we got to talk Michigan. By the way, last week's show felt like it was all about Michigan. This week's show feels like it's all about Ohio State when it comes to recruiting. I wonder what that means for Michigan fans. But speaking of Michigan in this Outback Bowl matchup against South Carolina, how could we all forget that Jadeveon Clowney hit a couple of years ago in the Outback Bowl with Vincent Smith and his helmet coming off, and it felt like his head was about to come off. I don't know if we're going to see that in this game, and I also don't know if we're going to see John O'Korn, the graphic you see up there. Is this not kind of an audition game maybe for Brandon Peters, if he's healthy enough to play, to kind of get a jump start on next year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Brandon Peters, he's healthy. He's going to play. He is the starting quarterback going into this game. And this will give Michigan an opportunity, not just Michigan, the staff, but its fans an opportunity to see what we have in store for 2018. I mean, Michigan fans have been clamoring for Peters to be the guy. Now we'll actually see him in a game as the starting quarterback, no doubt. It's his job. It's his job to lose, right? So now we get to see Brandon Peters. Hopefully Michigan will take the reins off of him and just let him go out and play. Let's face it, South Carolina, is not a good team. They're giving up over 300 yards a game. They're going against one of the top defenses in the country. This should be a game that Michigan handles from the first quarter, from the first snap to the end.
Well, I'll tell you something. Michigan fans are going to like that. You're playing to the home crowd. And I'm not giving my pick here. Remember, you got to go to the Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. But Michigan hasn't beat too many teams on their schedule that have the record, at least, as South Carolina. And Michigan's a 7-8 point favorite in this game. I don't know about that for the Michigan Wolverines. You got to come to our Facebook page to check it out. Let's check out the Orange Bowl next. This is another one of these games where both these teams in Wisconsin and the University of Miami had times in the season where we thought they were kind of shoo-ins maybe for the college football playoff and for having a chance to really win their leagues. And now it's one of these games where they kind of have to prove, hey, which one of these teams did in fact have the kind of season they were on pace for, and which one might have been maybe some kind of a flash in the pan.
Well, I wouldn't consider Wisconsin, a flash in the pan. I mean, they played a very good game against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. Unfortunately, it just wasn't their night. Someone had to win, someone had to lose. But I still think Wisconsin is a very good team. I think they match up really well against this Miami team, especially when you talk about what Wisconsin likes to do. Wisconsin loves to run the ball, And guess what? Miami is not very good at stopping the run. So it should be a classic matchup. I know what the folks down south think. Typical Big Ten team, they're going to be slow. They can't keep up with us. But I'm telling you right now, this Wisconsin team, they can run sideline to sideline, and they will match you for physicality.
I think that's fair. I think that when you look at this one, it's a good matchup for Wisconsin. But so often when you talk about Miami in bowl games, it has to do with their motivation level, it seems like. But this one's, it's the Orange Bowl. I mean, it's no longer in the Orange Bowl, whatever that's worth, but it's Miami trying to defend their home turf and prove the validation of the season. I think the motivation factor is there for Miami, but I do agree with you that Wisconsin matches up pretty well against the Hurricanes.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, what Wisconsin loves to do, they love to run the ball, and that is what they're good at. Miami is going to get a heavy dose of Jonathan Taylor to the right, Jonathan Taylor to the left, and Jonathan Taylor up the middle. And what you want to do is wear down that Miami defense, especially this time of year. You want to wear those guys down.
All right, one more marquee bowl game to focus in on. It's that PlayStation Fiesta Bowl. It's Penn State and Washington. We just heard about Penn State and what they're kind of building for into the future. The Big Ten, well represented, obviously, in some of these marquee bowl games. Maybe in Big Ten country, folks don't know a whole lot about Washington. They know about them last year. We know that Saquon Barkley is saying he's going to play in this game. It could be kind of a tribute game for him and the type of career he's had at Penn State. I look for a heavy dose of Saquon Barkley, the way that you just said that Wisconsin's going to be giving out a heavy dose of Jonathan Taylor.
Well, yeah, they're going to have to, because Washington is a very good team, a very sound team, a very athletic team. And guess what? You know who the #1 team is against the run is? Washington. That's how good their defense is. Right now, Penn State is ranked, I believe, in the 60s when it comes to rushing offense, which, if you think about it, Michigan's rushing offense is actually better than Penn State's offense. That's how much they've fallen off as far as Saquon Barkley in the run game. So they're going to have to get Saquon Barkley going early and often, feed him the ball, or pass the ball and hope that it opens up some running lanes for Saquon Barkley, or get him involved in the passing game.
Remember, check us out on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page for a complete preview of all the bowl games. I'm looking forward to talking about that Michigan State-Washington State game. Instead of getting into the entire slate in detail here, remember, you can check us out individually to break some of those down. I do want to share some of your comments from our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. This one from J. Everett Guerin. How does Miami get to play at home when we, so you know his angle on this, in Wisconsin, beat them the last time we played in a bowl game? That was that Champs Sports Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, in Orlando, when Miami players said it was too cold a few years back, which was my reference to earlier. But that is kind of a unique situation, is that a team gets to play what amounts to a home game in a bowl. If you were a player in that game and you were playing, say, what, UCLA in a Rose Bowl game, would that be an unfair advantage?
No, because I want to go and play in warm weather too. I'm tired of playing in the cold. Listen, I played in 1996 in a Purdue game. It was 1995, and it was 5 degrees. It rained, it snowed, it sleeted. It did everything in the weather spectrum. So if I'm a player, I want to play in warm weather. I don't want to play in cold weather.
So regardless of whether or not you're playing what amounts to a road game, you're playing it in California, or in this case, baby, Florida. It's good enough for you. All right, we'll save the rest of our comments for the other Big Ten bowl games. Do check us out on our Atlanta 10 Facebook page. For those of you guys out there celebrating, and for you too, Chris Howard, happy holidays to you.
Same to you, man. I appreciate that, man.
Little pat on the back.
I like that.
Hey, and thanks a lot to all of our great crew. They do great work behind the scenes. Whatever we do and say that looks right or sounds right, believe me, we can't take credit for any of it. It's those guys over there.
Yeah.
For Chris, I'm Sam. We'll see you after the holiday on Atlanta 10 Live.